Alright, what's going on, everybody? Michael Plundo back here, and welcome back to my podcast. And today, we're going to be breaking down one of the most dramatic off-season shifts we have seen in Pittsburgh in a long time, which is a complete overhaul of the Steelers coaching staff. That's right, the Steelers coaching staff has had some serious changes to it. This is a franchise that's been known for being built on stability, so when you see this kind of level of change, starting at the very top especially, it tells you everything you need to know about where the Steelers believe they are going to head next in their franchise. So let's start with the big picture here. For years, the Steelers have stayed competitive. 19 seasons under Mike Tomlin, not having a losing season, been to the playoffs the past 3 years, but there was an obvious growing sense that the team had hit a ceiling. The standard in Pittsburgh isn't just being relevant, it's championship contention. It's not just getting into the playoffs, being a one and done. It's competing for championships. That's what the Chief set a long time ago, and that's what guys like Ben Roethlisberger came in and, honored by that standard, winning the franchise 2 Super Bowls. But ever since he's retired, it hasn't been the same. And that's why the biggest change of all came at head coach, when Mike Tomlin announced after the Steelers' wildcard exit to the Houston Texans that he is stepping down and will no longer be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Hired back in 2007 when he was the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, Mike Tomlin has done a lot for this franchise, and he will forever be a Pittsburgh legend and icon there for what he's been able to do. Especially 19 years without a losing season, and the strong ties he had in the community, the strong relationships that he built over the years with the players, and just, being just an overall, great coach, just a guy that not only could teach you the game of football, but a guy that really helped set these players up, just for success in life, and just, really just offered himself to make sure that these guys, to let them know that, hey, I'm here for you just not as a coach, but also as a human being as well. But now, the Steelers, they have a new head coach. And who is that going to be? That is Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy is now leading the Steelers. Now, this move, it signals a philosophical shift, kind of towards structure, more of an offensive identity. And Mike McCarthy's got that postseason experience too. Now, granted, he's been 6-9 ever since the Steelers, lost to the Packers. And when they beat us that year in the Super Bowl in the 2010-11 season, Mike McCarthy's been 6-9 in the postseason in that span. Not a very good record, but the thing is, this guy is no stranger to the playoffs, and he's got miles, and I mean miles and years of coaching experience, which it seems like the Steelers wanted. So the Mike McCarthy era begins, and he brings a Super Bowl resume, decades of NFL experience, and a track record of developing quarterbacks and running just, that good style of West Coast offense. That's what he's been known for. And this is what this hire tells me what the Steelers want. They want a more defined offensive identity, because it really feels like, the past couple of years, the Steelers just, if you look at the way, the game plan, all the different schemes and formations they've ran, it's been outdated, and it just hasn't worked. Like I said, ever since Ben Roethlisberger decided to hang up the cleats, they've cycled through different quarterbacks. You tried the Mitchell Trubisky experiment, didn't work. You drafted Kenny Pickett in the 2022 NFL draft out of Pitt, who worked next door, who you got to see, kind of grow into what he was. But that didn't work, and he was gone after 2 years. And it really just feels like the Steelers, just didn't have anybody, didn't have that voice to really get them in the direction they needed to go offensively. They had talent on the defense, and that defense had some good years, even when Ben retired, but it just feels like they were wasted just because of a lackluster offense. So I feel like a more defined offensive identity is what the Steelers, are getting in Mike McCarthy. And another big thing is he's an experienced voice that's going to set the tone in high-pressure moments. This guy led some very explosive offenses in Dallas and with Green Bay as well. He got the best out of, guys like Jordy Nelson. He really helped develop Aaron Rodgers after sitting all those years behind Brett Favre. And he's not here to rebuild. And I think we all know that the Steelers and rebuild, they don't belong in the same sentence whatsoever. They are allergic to that word. Art Rooney II, he even said it himself. He doesn't like that word. And the Steelers, they've never liked that word for years. Like I said, Mike Tomlin for 19 years didn't have a single losing season. So did you really think that the Steelers, were going to change that identity when everybody, even the fan base, knows that they're not going to rebuild? It's just not going to happen. That's just not what they do. And that's why they brought Mike McCarthy, because he's here to win now, and the rest of his staff that he's bringing in reflects that mindset as well. So with that being said, let's get into who he's bringing in on this coaching staff. On the defensive side, the Steelers are bringing in an experienced vet to lead the defense, as Terrell Austin will no longer be the defensive coordinator, as he's been the defensive coordinator. He's held that title since the 2022 season after Keith Butler decided to retire. The Steelers are bringing in Patrick Graham as the new defensive coordinator, and this is a fascinating hire, a hire that I like personally. Graham is known for versatility, multiple fronts, disguised coverages, adjusting week to week based on personnel. One of the biggest problems I had with Terrell Austin was putting players in positions where they were not supposed to be whatsoever. A lot of times it looked like he had Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, in just situations and positions that they were not supposed to be in, and it hurt the Steelers a lot. When you have the highest paid defense in the league and you're giving up one of, the highest rate of explosive plays in the league, that's a problem, because that's not what you're paying your defense to do. And I think a lot of that falls on Terrell Austin. So for a Steelers defense that has always prided itself on toughness and smash mouth football, this feels like an evolution, not really a departure. You still want to be physical, but now with more adaptability against modern offenses, Patrick Graham, I feel like, is the guy that's going to help there. During the 2024 season, when he's coming over from the Las Vegas Raiders, his previous team, the Raiders defense ranked in the top 15 in total defense. They allowed 333 yards a game, and in terms of run defense, they allowed about 117 yards per game. And when it came to the passing defense, they allowed about 216 yards per game. Now, granted, again, I know what the Raiders were. They weren't a very good team, but that's still pretty decent numbers for a defense that was still a team that was still struggling all year. Those are pretty good statistics to have, most of which were better than the Steelers this past season. And he's got the most out of guys. And it's funny because one of those guys is Robert Spillane, who used to be a former Steeler. Spillane had a career-high 158 tackles that year in 2024, ranking third in the entire NFL, and set a Raiders single-season record. And Max Crosby, who, a dog, and who's been a dog before even Graham got there, made 3 consecutive Pro Bowls with 45 tackles, 17 tackles for a loss, 7.5 sacks, and 5 passes defended in just 12 games in 2024. The defensive line as a whole accounted for 20, which ranked second most along defensive line units in the NFL. So I think Patrick Graham is coming into a defense where more talent to work with, a lot more talent to work with compared to what the Raiders have. Guys like TJ Watt, obviously, Cam Hayward, who's still going, who's still playing great ball even in his late 30s. You got young studs like Jack Sawyer, Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith, who isn't talked about enough, Peyton Wilson, even Cole Holcomb, who I thought was pretty solid, but it's looking like he's probably going to leave in free agency. But I will say we are going to need to get some safeties. I will say that was probably one of the weakest points of the defense last year, so it's going to be interesting to see what the Steelers decide to do there, hoping we add, via free agency, draft, whatever they decide to do. And I didn't even mention Joey Porter Jr., who had an amazing season this year, who should have been an All-Pro. And one thing about the Raiders defense, too, was they finished 9th in the NFL in scoring defense, 19.5 points allowed a game, a 17-place improvement from that season prior. The defense also went from 28th overall in 2022 before he got there, and he's really just helped, get the Raiders defense and turn them into the middle of the pack kind of group, and also a group that can create splash plays as well. And another key statistic that I found was the Raiders, they didn't really give up a lot of explosive plays. They had one of the lowest rates in terms of that. And the Steelers really have struggled with that the past couple of years. And when you're in a division with guys like Lamar Jackson, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins in there, you better believe that Patrick Graham, that statistic is going to be much needed coming into the Steelers, because you cannot allow those guys to dictate a game, because when they do, it's going to be real hard stopping them. So I'm really excited to see what Patrick Graham is going to do for this defense. I think it can be a lot better than it was this year. The Steelers defense, we saw it improve late season down the stretch, but still, not exactly what it should be, and we're going to need that consistency throughout the season. So I like Patrick Graham. I think it's an upgrade over Terrell Austin, and very excited to see what he does. So really think that is a good hire, and he was definitely one of the candidates I was hoping the Steelers would look into, and now he is now the new Steelers defensive coordinator. And more changes to the coaching staff, where the Steelers, going back to the offensive side of the ball, let's talk offense, because this is where you really see the reset again. Mike McCarthy coming in as the head coach, now at wide receivers coach. Zach Azzani no longer there. The Steelers add Adam Henry coming over from the Buffalo Bills. His background, working with elite wideouts, brings credibility and high expectations. Worked with Stephon Diggs for a couple of years. He's even worked with Mike McCarthy before back in the Dallas days. So there's already familiarity there. And this is about route detail, accountability, and maximizing talent on the outside, which the Steelers, one of the weakest, and I mean weakest positions that they've had for a couple years now, is the wide receiver room. It has been an absolute mess, and Omar Khan has kind of neglected that, and I'm really hoping that they fix that this upcoming offseason. Get some playmakers alongside DK Metcalf, Pat Freiermuth. Darnell Washington's going to be healthy next year. You got Jaylen Warren in the backfield. You got a good offensive line, which the Steelers got a great, coach, and an even better assistant offensive line coach, who I'm excited to talk about here in a second. But the Steelers really need to get more playmakers on that offense so they can run that West Coast offense that Mike McCarthy is going to want to run. Because, you got third-year receiver now, who's going to be in his third year next year, is Roman Wilson, who you drafted in the third round in the 2024 draft out of Michigan, who he's got talent. He's got potential. We've seen some splash plays here and there. The problem is the Steelers just don't use him. They really just don't use him at all. And you can't do that. That's not what, you draft mid-round guys for. You don't just use them, especially in a room where you really need to use, the guys you have, because instead they would opt for veterans like Adam Thielen and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who, which all due respect to those guys, aren't exactly what they used to be. So the Steelers need to get younger there, take the pressure off of DK Metcalf, Pat Freiermuth, and most likely Aaron Rodgers, who is 99% going to be on the team next year if I had to guess. So the Steelers got to get some playmakers there, and I think bringing in Adam Henry as the new coach for that position group specifically, I think that's going to help out a lot. And more to important moves that the Steelers made up front is the offensive line. The offensive line, which really took big steps forward this past year. I was really impressed with what I saw from guys like Zach Frazier, who was in his second year out of West Virginia after a great rookie year. Mason McCormick, who was also in his second year. And then Troy Fautanu, who we got to see this year after his rookie season was wiped due to injury. So you bring in James Campen, who's got familiarity with Aaron Rodgers from their Green Bay days. They're infamous for that Hard Knocks clip when the Jets and Carolina Panthers held that joint practice. So I'm really excited to see those two back together, just because, I already know there's going to be great content there, just for entertainment purposes. But I feel like already have that familiarity. You're coming into an offensive line that's only going to get better with how young they are. And I really think he's going to help Broderick Jones finally break out into what we think Steelers Nation thinks he can be. So really excited to see what James Campen is going to do there. And he's also going to have some help alongside, as they now brought in Jari Evans, who is the New Orleans Saints assistant offensive line coach. And Jari Evans is a well-respected name, being on the Saints for those years when he was there, when the Drew Brees years. It's got familiarity with Mike McCarthy. And I really just think that, you bring in a guy like Jari Evans and his background, I think he's going to do wonders for this offensive line. Saints Hall of Famer, Hall of Famer alone tells you what you need to know. So, just one of the most decorated players turned coaches is coming to Pittsburgh. And he's coming in to help a group out that's only going to get better. Hard to really complain about that one. So, a complete reset on the offensive coaching staff for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and really excited to, what it's going to lead to. Like I said, James Campen brings experience, building cohesive units, while Jari Evans adding that former All-Pro perspective. Huge for a young offensive line that's going to only teach them more technique and mentality from someone who's done it at the highest level. And, Eddie Faulkner, who was previously the running backs coach, is no longer going to be the running back coach, who I liked. I especially, was very impressed with what he was able to get out of Jaylen Warren and what Jaylen Warren is now. In the backfield, you now got Raymond Chinyoung, who now will step in as the new running backs coach for the Steelers. This signals a focus, on fundamentals, vision, ball security, and pass protection, something that Jaylen Warren's already good at, and getting a coach who, preaches that and emphasizes that, I think Jaylen Warren's only going to get better. And running backs in the system, they're not just going to be running. They're not going to be runners, and we've seen that. We've seen Jaylen Warren turn into a receiving back. We've seen him deck players when it comes to pass protection. I love Jaylen Warren, man. He's one of my favorite players to watch. He's like a bowling ball out there. And I'm really excited to see what Raymond is going to do. And I'm also really excited to see what now second-year player Caleb Johnson is. I'm really excited to see what this new coach is going to get out of Caleb Johnson. Not having the rookie season that he wanted to have, certainly, especially that, that Week 2 game against Seattle, which I think most Steeler fans know which play I'm talking about there. But I really think that Caleb Johnson is going to benefit from this hire. And I'm really excited, just to see if he can take that step forward, especially since the Steelers, still really want to see what he can do and if maybe him and Warren can form a nice 1-2 punch. So, going back to the defense, the Steelers made another hire, and it is another positional coach coming over from the Raiders along with Patrick Graham. It is Jason Simmons who will likely be taking over as the defensive backs coach. Now, people, myself included, originally thought Gerald Alexander was going to still, retain that role of being the defensive backs coach, but that is no longer the case. That will be most likely Jason Simmons, as Gerald Alexander left for a more expanded role with the Minnesota Vikings. So, Jason Simmons, having that chemistry already with Patrick Graham to where they work together, so they already know how they're going to want to do certain things, what they're going to preach to these players. I think he's coming into a talented group here. He's going to work with Joey Porter Jr., who's only getting better. A really good breakout year for him. Should have been an All-Pro in my opinion. And, that matters today in today's NFL, such as covering space, creating turnovers, and communicating on the back end is everything. And that's something that, Steelers safety Deshaun Elliott is really big about. It really, sucked to see him go down midseason. We could have really used him in that, latter stretch late in the season. So really, happy that he's going to be coming back. And I think Jason Simmons is going to like to work with a guy like that. And with Patrick Graham's scheme, the secondary is going to only become even more important. And Simmons' role, could be pivotal. So really curious to see how Jason Simmons, approaches this, and I'm really curious to see what him and Patrick Graham are going to do to this defense. So, looking at all of this, looking at all the Steelers coaching changes that I'm talking about here, what does this coaching overhaul really tell us? What does this all tell us? Are the Steelers still going to be competitive? Are they going to change? Are there going to be drastic changes, schematically? Are there going to be different formations? What exactly is going to change with these new coaches coming in? Now, keep in mind, there's still some roles to be filled here. The Steelers still looking for that offensive coordinator, but I don't really know how much of a role that's going to dictate for whoever is going to take that, because I think we all know that Mike McCarthy is going to call the plays, and he already confirmed that, which I'm perfectly fine with, no problem there whatsoever. But this tells us that the Steelers are done being comfortable. This staff is experienced. This staff is intentional. These guys are grinders, and this staff is aligned with a clear goal. Win now while building something sustainable. There are no half measures here. The Steelers didn't tweak, they reset, and that's what they do. And I'll say it again, they are allergic to that word rebuild. They don't do that. When have you ever known the Pittsburgh Steelers to be a team that rebuilds? Tell me. I'm dying to know because I still haven't seen it yet. And I think Steelers Nation will tell you that too. Art Rooney II will tell you that too. Bill Cowher will tell you that. Mike Tomlin will tell you that. The Steelers don't rebuild. These guys want to be in contention every year. So I feel like a coaching staff that's got that experience and guys that are going to want to come in and get the best out of these players, that's what that tells us. They're done being comfortable and they have that clear goal, win the seventh, win that seventh Super Bowl. So, nonetheless, I'm really excited just to see what this turns into. I really think this can work out great for the Steelers. It could also not. There could also be some things that, blow up in the Steelers' face, especially with, Mike McCarthy's playoff resume, which I have my doubts about, but I'm going to give this guy a chance because he's a local boy. He's from Greenfield. He knows the expectations that are going to come with this job, so I like that. But I really think we have to give this guy a chance. And look, you guys are allowed to have your own opinion. I am not here to change your opinion. I'm not here to give you, I'm not here to say, oh, you're wrong for thinking that Mike McCarthy is a bad hire for the Steelers. You guys can think what you want. Everybody's allowed to have their own opinion. I'm just offering a different perspective as to what I think and to my opinion as on what I think of this hire and the other coaches that are coming with Mike McCarthy to Pittsburgh. But that's my overall breakdown of the Steelers' new coaching staff and what it means moving forward. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share it with another Steelers fans. Let me know what you think. And seriously, I'm genuinely curious to know what you guys think. Does this staff get the Steelers back into serious contention? Does this break the 9 to 10 year playoff drought of the Steelers? Does it finally end that? Let me know. Give me a review. Hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. I'd love to hear your opinions on it. I'm Michael Plendo. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.